Hi and welcome. My name is Heather Gonzago and I'm joined here today with my colleague Kelly Hutchins, and we're going to discuss a few tips and tricks that will hopefully help you as a developer get started up in developing and debugging your JavaScript API applications. So before we even get into this, I want to point to where you can access these slides and any demos that we will show. It's going to be all residing within my GitHub repo. So this is just a short URL pointing to that repo. And basically it's just, this is the 2021 for the 2021 Dev Summit, but we also have earlier years as well. So again, just the slides, we have some of the demos and any additional information that you may want to pull for this particular session. Okay, so before we can actually even go in and start playing around and debugging some of these applications, we wanted to show you the very first place that you should hopefully get familiarized with if you haven't already done so. Some of you, if you aren't familiar, or maybe even if you are familiar with our API, with our SDK documentation, you may have noticed over the past couple weeks that we have done a bit of a facelift with it. If we take a look here, you'll notice here on the left-hand side within, so this is on the developer site, we have a JavaScript specific section only for documentation. You'll notice here that we have a topic specifically for getting started. So this is a good one, especially for those that might be brand new, to go in here and maybe just kind of give yourself an overview again, or even if for those of you who may not be new, but maybe haven't touched upon some of this for a while, there is going to be a few different things in here. Notably working if you, we have the concept now within our API of working with API keys. So all of that, we touch upon that and basically give you some, just some steps to do to go ahead and get you started. In addition to that, we also have a specific section for tooling. If you worked with our SDK prior to this, you might have remembered we had a bunch of different sections for different frameworks. If you wanted to work with different frameworks to access and work and use our API. So basically what we've done is we've consolidated a lot of that and we've brought all of it into this introduction to tooling guide topic that we have here. So we're not going to go into major detail for the sake of this session, but we do have other sessions within the Developer Summit this year that will be specifically talking about the different types of tooling, working with the API, different builds, different ways of accessing the API, what's the best use case for your specific scenario that you need. One of the things that you might want to look into, or maybe you might question, or after Developer Summit and you start listening to some different sessions here, you might have more questions. Definitely go in and take a look at the, we have a chart here for comparing the AMD and ECMAScript modules, or ES modules. AMD is the system that we've basically been using since the beginning of 4.0, but now we also, starting just past few months, we have now also provided the ability to work with ES modules as well. So we have all of that documented here, a comparison of when you would want to use one over the other, and then basically just some good information of how to get some additional information as well. So again, all of this here under developer tooling within our SDK. All right, so in addition to all of that, we also have some really good tutorials that have been put together by a lot of really talented folks on our developer site, if we take a look again back in that SDK, you'll notice here on the left-hand side, so I showed you before, I showed you the install and setup and the developer and the tooling. We also have a section here specific for tutorials. And you'll notice here, it breaks it down to the specific functionality that you may need for your application. So goes into feature layers and pop-ups, changing out different base map layers, editing data, things like that. And it breaks it all down into really simple steps. So again, I know this technically, this might be very, very simple for some users, but again, I think it's also really good, useful information for anybody to know that this information is there. Because it does to me anyways. I realize, you might be working with this, I've been working with this API for quite some time, but I'm still learning new things. I go back in here and I'll see things, I'll be like, oh, I didn't realize that, there is more than one way to do something. And we'll have that here, a lot of that will be written or documented within the SDK. Okay, so another bit of additional information that I think would be useful is to take reference or take note of Renes' blog. So Rene is one of my colleagues. He is a developer here at Esri, but he is also responsible for his own personal blog that he's had for years now, with where he goes in and he has a lot of really useful, very useful information regarding working with our API, different frameworks, just a lot of really neat, interesting things that he has done and has found to work, tips and tricks that he has found and has done, things that he's created over the years that I definitely think would be useful for anybody that, whether you're new or not. Just take note of where this is, bookmark it maybe, and just, he has, I believe he also has a YouTube channel where he'll go over certain things, go over, new functionality or whatever it may be. But yeah, definitely something to take note of, and an interesting blog at that. Another one is Kelly and I actually did an older version of this session. It was a little bit more beefed up. So there's a lot, I wouldn't say a lot, but there was, it had a bit more information to this. This is more of just the, quick and easy 30-minute demo theater session, whereas this was an actual webinar that we did about a year ago. It's still out on the Esri site. Basically, all you have to do is if you just Google it, just do a developing and debugging webinar for Esri, and this will take you to the, it was actually about a year ago or so. It'll take you to this link where you can actually go in and listen to us talk about not the same exact stuff, but similar things that we have done over the years to try to help us troubleshoot and figure out some basic common issues. Okay, so another useful resource would be our Esri community site. But basically what you'll see here is we have sections where you can go in and get access to our blogs. You can get questions answered. We've got some of our documentation, videos, and you can submit your own ideas as well. I personally really like the question and answer portion of all of this. We have people directly at Esri, myself included, or even people, such as yourselves who may go in here. You might have similar questions, so maybe something that someone has already posted. It may have already been answered. Maybe you've already figured out what you need to do, and you can go in here and put in this information so that maybe a future user, later down the line can also be helped by it. But it is a really good resource. Basically I can just tell you from my own personal experience that I pretty much do come in here almost daily, just to try to figure out, some things like, maybe some places where, users or developers such as yourself, you might be experiencing some issues. Maybe there's places that possibly we can improve upon within our documentation to make things easier to understand. So again, it is a good resource. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but just make sure to take note of this and possibly bookmark this as well. Okay, so I touched upon some of the like broad level information regarding where a lot of we've got a lot of useful resources. Most of them here within the SDK documentation. One thing I'd like to touch upon that I think can be extremely useful and relatively easy to use, and it'll potentially save you a ton of time and aggravation, and that is using the JavaScript API snippets. So basically, you can access these in the Visual Studio Marketplace. So let's go in here and open that up. Okay, so you can access these in the Marketplace. You'll see in here, basically all you need to do is just install this on your machine, and it literally takes like no time. It takes just a couple seconds. I have already installed it on my machine at this point, but once it is installed, it's automatically recognized as that extension. So basically what it does, and it shows you here just in its little animation, is that based upon the name of the snippet that you're trying to use, you start typing it out, it recognizes it, you press tab, and then it will automatically stub out the full template. So it makes a lot of repetitive lines of code a lot easier to type out. Helps avoid things, just like typos and missed brackets and semicolons and so forth. So it's just an easy tool to use, kind of in your back pocket, that will just make your day, your day-to-day, basic day-to-day things when writing your code. It'll just make it a lot easier. So let's just go ahead and we're just going to take a really quick look at this in action. What I have already done is I have a very, very basic HTML file here. There is not a lot to it. I've got just a view div, so a div for my map view. And I am referencing the current API and the CSS. And what I'd like to do is I'm going to go in here and I just want to go in and actually bring in and display a specific web map. So I know I can do this based upon the web maps portal ID. So in this case, I know that there's a snippet called web map. So I'm just going to go in, start typing web map. You'll see that pops up. And you'll notice here that this automatically stubs this whole thing out for me. So makes things a little bit easier. The only thing I need to do is I just need to go in here and update the ID. So I have that over here on my other screen. Grab that. And one thing to also take note of is that in this particular case, I was working and playing around with this prior to this. So I already had Esri, I was already requiring the appropriate class in this case and passing in the appropriate argument in the right order. If you do not have it already in here after stubbing it out, it does not do that for you. You will still need to make sure you go up in and specify the right class and pass in the argument, and making sure that you keep it, if you're working with the AMD modules, making sure that you keep it in the correct order. So just go ahead and save that out and open this up, take a quick look. And what we see is an already existing web map with that associated web map ID. If you are so inclined, you can contribute snippets to this. It's an open GitHub repo. We have a link here. All you basically have to do is just search for the VS Code snippets in ArcGIS, and it will bring you to this repo that we have. Okay, so I'm going to touch very, very briefly on a little bit of API tips and common questions that people like yourself may have when working with our API, and then Kelly's going to finish it off. So first off, this is something that we have seen over the years when people are working with pop-ups. A big question that we get, and even you'll see, back in that Esri community site with all the questions and answers, you'll see people asking, hey, I'd like to have multiple pop-ups within my application at one time. Is this possible? How do I do this? And it is possible. The way to do that is using a method that we have off of the pop-up widget itself called fetch features. And what we have here is we actually have a sample here within the SDK documentation that does exactly this. It takes multiple layers, and then based upon where you click in these layers, it takes the underlying information for these layers and puts them in individual feature widgets or pop-up information within a side panel. So if we take a quick look, so basically what this does is, just like it says, it queries the graphics from multiple layer views. So if we're going to go ahead here and we'll just open that up. We have imagery layers and we have feature layers. All of these layers have this associated pop-up template. So there is an associated pop-up template that goes along with the feature layer. But what we can do here is you can see that I have now, instead of just one pop-up that comes and shows up within the map itself, I'm showing information individually, so basically two pop-ups within this side panel. And I have all of that, I have all of the customization written out within the code to tell it specifically what I want it to show and how I want it to show. Okay, so with all of that, I am going to turn this over to Kelly, and she is going to talk more about API tips and tricks.
Thanks, Heather. The first thing I want to talk to you is about this topic of events and handling events. So let's take a look at this help topic that has some good information. This is included in the API reference. It's not really buried, it's just included as part of the map view help. And I think sometimes we can overlook it because we might just be looking for a particular property method or event and skip over this good textual information at the top of the reference. There are events that are dependent upon each other, and the timing of how you interact with the view, the map view, or the scene view can affect the type of event or the event that gets triggered. So there's some good information on how these different types of events work. So what does a single click mean, and what are the various components of it versus a double click versus a hold? So I think reading through this information is really useful. But what I find even more useful is this sample in the help on handling events. So it's called the Event Explorer, and this particular sample happens to be working with a scene view, a 3D map, but same thing applies with the 2D map. So you can see as you interact with the view, we can drag things around. You can see that it has the class view properties at the bottom, so we can see that we're interacting with the view and that it's updating. We can see that the pointer events that happen as we leave and enter the view. We can see the clicks and double clicks. We can see drag. We can see key down, key up, focus, resize, etc. It's a good way to get a visual view of how the events work and which event will be appropriate for you to work with in your app to accomplish various things. So that's that sample, and I think it's really helpful. The next thing I wanted to cover is the ability to constrain the visible extent. Let's look at this sample app that we have. So here we're looking at an app that has map data that's located in Southern California. This is trail and trailheads. So if we just set up our app, point to this map, we have a search box set up, and don't do anything, people can play around all over the world. I can go start mucking around in Australia, even though there's no data in Australia. I can also search, and it's going to search for places all over the world, right? that aren't anywhere near my data. So Paris, and it's going to take me to France. And that might be fun, but that's not where we want our users. We want our users in this example interacting with our data in Southern California, not getting lost or distracted by the whole world. So we can set that up using a constraint geometry to both restrict the map area that we're viewing and to limit the search results to that map area to make a much more, I think, usable map for people. So this is that source code for that sample app. I'm just going to uncomment a little bit of code and explain what it does. So up here we've defined this geometry. This is the extent that we want to constrict our map view to. So then we can, when we create the map view, we can use this constraints object to provide that geometry, that extent geometry, and define a min and max zoom scale that's appropriate for our data. So that if we save the app and go back, we will see that our map is going to be restricted to those zoom scales and that geometry. We want to do the same thing with the search. So in this case, we're working with the search widget in the JavaScript API, and we're working with the default search source, which is the world locator. So we create the search, then we look at all the default sources and set the source filter to that input geometry. So that's going to restrict the search to that same extent. So let's go back to our app, reload it. Now this time, you can't tell, but I'm using my scroll wheel. I can zoom in, but I can't zoom out past this extent. I can pan around, but I'm restricted based on that geometry and zoom scale that I set. So this is nice. It keeps our users focused in this Southern California area. Same with the search. If I try and type Paris, I get back results in the search area. So in Woodland Hills and Agora Hills and Thousand Oaks instead of Paris, France. So it's a much nicer, more usable map experience if you constrain the extents. Request Interceptor is another nice feature. It's something that most of the time we don't ever need to use it or ever need to know about it being there. But when we do need to use it, it's really, really, really useful. So what the Request Interceptor allows you to do is for any requests that are sent through Esri request, we can make changes before the request is sent, make changes after it's sent but before it's returned, and then we can handle errors for specific things. So maybe if you have a layer and you want to handle errors specifically for it, you can use the Request Interceptor. So I think the doc for this has a lot of good information. So here it is in the help. It tells you what it is. It talks about the before and after callbacks and the error callbacks. And the part that I think is nice is it has a lot of examples of how to use it. So in this case, we have this one particular feature layer, and we want to intercept requests to that feature layer and do something. In this case, we're using the before interceptor callback to check if the query that's being sent with that feature layer has a max allowable offset property set, and if so, we're setting it to 0. For whatever reason in this app, we need to do that. It's also got an example of an after interceptor callback to look at SSL and do something with the particular request if that's set. There's a few more examples here. It's worth looking at those and reading through this. And like I said, it's not something that we need to use often or all the time, but when you do need to use it, it can be a lifesaver. So it's good to know about it and have it in your bag of tools. I also have a link to a forum posting. Somebody asked a question on the forum about how they used to be using Esri request to make these requests to a free API that's no longer free. Now this API requires a key. So they wanted to ask how they can, add that key into the request. And the response was to use, they can use Request Interceptor, and it has an example of how to do that to modify the header to include that API key. So I thought I'd include this link because it's an example of a real world use of request Interceptor. This is one where, your app still works, but sometimes you have errors in the developer console that you want to get rid of. So in this case, the error, it's a little bit hard to see, but it says view goto interrupted. So you might in your app have a goto call to go to a particular, zoom to a particular geometry in the map, like perhaps an extent. But that's a promise, and sometimes it gets canceled. Maybe you have another request that comes in to zoom to a different location, and that one gets interrupted. Your app still works, it's just going to that new location, but you'll see these errors in the console, and often we want to clean up our developer console and not have it look cluttered with errors, right? Especially errors that aren't breaking our application. So the way you can do that is, here's our call to go to, we pass in that geometry we want to zoom to, and then all we do is append catch to the end. So then you could handle that error and do something with it if you need to, or just catch it and kind of ignore and get rid of that error so it doesn't show up in our developer console. Now let's look at some cool features that are available in browser-based developer tools. I'll be using Chrome in this demo, but you can find similar tools in the other major browsers. The first one I wanted to show you is the concept of light and dark themes. So a lot of cases now in your operating system, I work on a Mac, you can define your preferred color scheme, whether it's light or dark. Well, in the JavaScript API, we can build that capability into our apps because we have a light color theme and also a dark color theme. And we can test out and make sure this works by using the Chrome tools. So let me open up this demo app. So here's our demo app, and let's go into the developer tools. And the place you're going to find the ability to check or to test the color preferences is under More Tools, Rendering. So here we have some options down here, and one of them is Emulate Preferred Color Scheme. So right now we have no emulation. Let's see what happens when we choose Preferred Color Scheme Dark. Now, I don't know if you could tell, but the zoom controls and the attribution and the pop-up all went to use the dark color theme. And then we can check Prefers Color Scheme Light. So now we know our code is set up correctly to detect light and dark color schemes. So let's take a look at that code. The code is in that same demo folder as the restrict extent. So here is detect color theme. Really, all we do in our application is we have a link to the Esri style sheet. We default to the light color theme. And then here we have some code that looks for this match media property on the window object. And if it's supported in that browser, we get that style sheet that we created, and then we check to see if they prefer the color scheme dark. If they do, then we change the link tag to point to the dark CSS for the JavaScript API. If they don't, then we use the light CSS. So that's an example of how you would support that behavior in your application and test it with the browser developer tools. The next thing I wanted to point out is the developer tools will show you lots of information, and it's good to keep an eye on that console when you're developing, because you'll get notifications about things that you want to address in your code. So here's an example of a deprecation warning in the JS API. It tells me when I see this in my console, I know that the application that I'm running is using this renderable decorator that's deprecated at version 4.19. So I want to go look at my code and make the adjustments I need to make to handle that deprecation notice. This is a link to the API where it shows us some details about it, tells us kind of what we need to do. So I went to look at renderable, and it says at version 4.19, properties are automatically tracked now and don't need to be decorated with this decorator. So that's an easy fix. We just go to our code and remove that renderable decorator, and we shouldn't see that console warning anymore. So keep an eye on the console. You'll get the deprecation notices. You can look at them, look at the help, figure out what you need to do to get your app, to make sure that your app still works once that property is gone. In the developer tools, you can run these code snippets. They're useful. You can have like these pre-written sets of code that you might use to do various tasks. So I think I have this app. Yep, I have this app running here. So this is an app. We'll go back to our developer tools. We'll go here to elements. Sorry, not elements, sources. And then from sources to snippets. Then I have this little code snippet that I created using new snippet and save. And basically what this thing does is it runs some JavaScript to give me the center Latin long for my page. So I can run it. And in the console, I should see, let's see, where is it? 1 second. I think my window is just too small and I'm not seeing where these results are. Okay, it's probably down here. Well, trust me, it's in this case, it looks like I have a little error in that snippet. Let's reload the browser page. I think I just reran it too many times. Okay, now I'm just going to have this open so we can see it. Go back here to our snippet, run it, and it tells me here, this is my lat and this is my lon for that particular location at the time when I ran it. Another useful thing that we'll look at is, let's clear our developer console, is the ability to create a live expression. And I actually use these more than I use snippets. You can just create a live expression and type it in. We already have one. That live expression gets the latitude. Let's create another one to get the longitude. Okay, now we can see that as we move around, these live expressions are getting re-executed. So this is, an example of one I use a lot. If I want to set my map up and find out the lat lon of the center to enter into my map view code, I can set up these live expressions, I can execute my map, and I can get those values as I navigate around. So I can get it exactly the way I want it, and then take those values and copy them into my application. So that's the snippet where you set it up, you can run that code, you can run it once or more than once, and you can get those values. Or the one I use more frequently are these live expressions where you can get those coordinates as you navigate around the map, or just write a really quick live expression to test something in your application. I find this live expression useful. Sensors are really useful too if you have to build an application that supports a different place in the world and maybe a different language. The JavaScript API is translated in over 30 different languages, so it supports all of those languages. So let's look at sensors. Let's open up the browser. I'm going to open up my developer tools. I'm going to get rid of these live expressions just to clean up our console. Okay, and now we have this app that has data that is in Japan, in the Tokyo area. So currently I can use my current location, but my physical current location is in Olympia, Washington. So if I press this thing, it's going to zoom me to Olympia, which is not where my data is. So I can't test that functionality in my app. But I can tell the browser tools that I'm in Japan, and then I could test how this capability works. So the way we do that is by coming to sensors. And there's a whole list of locations. So you can create your own location. You can test what happens if location is unavailable. So here, let's say we want to look at Tokyo. Then if we use that find my location, it's going to go to this latitude and longitude, and it's also gonna put our language in the Japanese locale. So let's rerun our app. And now if we look, we can see that our okay, hold on. Tokyo. Let's switch to one and then back. Tokyo. Reload our app. Now, if we hover over the tooltip, we can see that the text is in Japanese. This is a hard-coded string here that was in English. If you use the out-of-the-box search, it would have this in Japanese. So here's the Find My Location. It should take us to a place in Tokyo, which is at this latitude and longitude that we specified. So this is how you can test various locales. We could say French and reload the page. We could set it up in a French latitude and longitude too, but we're quickly just testing the locale here. So you can see that now the tools in the JavaScript API understand that you're in a browser with the locale in French, and they'll be in French instead of in Japanese or in English. So this is nice when you're testing both your physical location in the world with the Find Me location tools, and to ensure that your app is translated into appropriate languages as you expect it to be. Okay. Okay, so thanks a lot for attending the session. We hope you learned some helpful tips and tricks. Check out the source code and the slides on the GitHub repository, and please provide your feedback for the session by using the session survey link. Thank you.